Father Gerald Robinson barely spoke a word in court today. Both prosecution and defense attorneys, however, had plenty to say.
I'm ready to go.
The hot issue at hand, comments the priest made to cold case investigators when they reopened the murder case in 2004. Today, the prosecutor asked investigator Thomas Ross what led to Robinson's arrest.
Did any of those statements that he made implicate himself as to the homicide of Sister Margaret Paul?
Yes.
Robinson's attorney argues the statements shouldn't be introduced at the trial because Robinson was never read his rights. Investigators say that wasn't needed.
We asked to talk to him and he invited us in.
Ross says he visited Robinson at his home just to talk when the priest admitted he lied during a 1980 interview, telling a detective someone else had confessed to the killing.
He advised us that this was true, that Detective Marks was coming down quite hard on him, and that he more or less said that to deflect Detective Marks' his accusatory tone at that time.
Police say Robinson also failed to give a good alibi. They say he acknowledged that he was the only one with possession of the suspected murder weapon, a letter opener that belonged to the priest.
That's
Defense attorney Alan Conniff says whether or not Robinson was officially under arrest, none of his statements will hold up if the priest was bullied into making them. Sasha Bray, 13 ABC, Action News.
Father Gerald Robinson showed no emotion as prosecutors argued why forensic expert Paulette Sutton should testify in his murder trial. The priest is accused of killing Sister Margaret Ann Paul in the chapel at the former Mercy Hospital back in 1980. Prosecutors presented a book written by Sutton as evidence that she's qualified to testify.
It is about bloodstain pattern analysis.
Sutton is one of 4 people in the world who's certified as a competent forensic expert in blood stain pattern interpretation. She told Judge Thomas Ossowick how she reviewed the blood patterns on the altar cloth, as well as the letter opener allegedly used to kill the nun.
In this instance, what I did was prepare exemplar transfers to see if I could create transfer patterns that were similar to what I was seeing on the cloth.
She wasn't the only high-profile woman who took the stand today. Father Robinson's defense team flew in anthropologist Kathleen Reichs from North Carolina.
The 2 main areas in the lab would be ID and trauma analysis.
A nationally broadcast television show is based on her work. She also does all of the anthropology work for the province of Quebec. Prosecutors tried to pick apart her qualifications, pointing out she did not do any anthropology work in this case. She only reviewed police reports and pictures.
I think I got 2 sets of items. I initially got a disc with photographs on it, and the quality of the images wasn't all that good.
Are you banning me from the property? Is the bishop?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am.
I'm being banned?
You are not going to come onto the private property at this time.
SNAP member Claudia Versalati wanted to deliver a letter to Bishop Leonard Blair. The organization wants the bishop to forbid Father Gerald Robinson from wearing his Roman collar during his murder trial. He's accused of killing Sister Margaret Ann Paul back in 1980.
First, you wouldn't say I was banned?
That letter, then I think our conversation has ended.
But Versalati walked right in the front door and handed the letter to the building manager. When she walked out, she was in tears.
Treated like we were derelicts or trash or less than.
John Schoonmaker says he was abused by a priest.
The collar carries with it a very strong emotional influence for most Catholics. The collar is how you identify a priest.
He says the diocese is sending victims abused by priests the wrong messages by allowing the priest to wear his collar. SNAP cited the church's national abuse guidelines, which say a credibly accused priest is not permitted to present himself as a priest in public. A diocese spokesperson wouldn't go on camera for this story, but told me today Bishop Blair has already decided Father Robinson can wear his collar at the trial.
If it was credible enough to set him aside and place him on leave, then it's credible enough that he shouldn't be presenting himself as a priest.
It sounds like it's a legitimate argument, and I think that hopefully if they're going to ask that, maybe the diocese would listen to what they have to say.
He should probably wear it.
Why is that?
Because he's still a priest.
I don't see what difference it would make, though, to be quite honest with you.
This Lucas County courtroom stands quiet on a holiday weekend.
But come Monday morning, it will be the center of a major murder trial.
It's like no other. I've been over here doing this for over 20 years, and this is by far the highest profile case we've had.
2 years after being indicted in the murder of a nun, Father Gerald Robinson will finally get his day in court. Robinson is accused of killing Sister Margaret Ann Paul in 1980. The charges have attracted national media attention.
We're going to do what we normally do. We'll have additional staff in certain positions and do the things that, the obvious things.
This is going to be a busy corner here.
Outside the courthouse, Toledo police are getting ready for the influx of news crews, attorneys, jurors, and witnesses.
We're expecting a traffic jam on Michigan Street and on Adams Street for the next 3 weeks.
Police say you might want to consider avoiding the courthouse area. Parking will be available to media only on some streets, and traffic could be a problem.
I would avoid Michigan Street and Adams Street in the downtown area unless you want to wait in traffic.
Prosecutors say jury selection and the trial could last 3 to 4 weeks. Erica Hurt, 13 ABC, Action News.
As parishioners at Christ the King left Mass, Bill Coos was thinking about the prayer he's made for the past 26 Easters.
Of course, I pray for the sister every day because she was a sweet person.
Coos says he knew Sister Margaret Ann Paul. She's the nun police say Father Robinson murdered. Coos says he knew Father Robinson as well.
And they were both great people.
That's why Coos says he's torn over this trial.
You know, I hope things work out for him, but the way it looks, I'd say it's stacked against him.
Lawyers will begin selecting the jury responsible for deciding how the evidence stacks up tomorrow. But Coos says his chief concerns aren't what happens inside or outside the courtroom.
You know, to the sisters, my heart goes out to you. And may the Lord take care of that nun.
In West Toledo, Zach Ottenstein, 13 ABC, Action News.
Jury selection has been a tedious process. After days of questioning, 16 men and women have been seated on the panel that will decide if Father Robinson is in fact guilty as charged. There are 12 jurors and 4 alternates. They were all given orders by the judge after being chosen this afternoon.
During the trial, do not talk about this case or the people involved in it with anyone, and that would include family members, persons living in your household, friends and co-workers, spiritual leaders, advisors, things of that nature.
It took 4 days to seat the jury that will decide the outcome of this landmark case. The first 3 days involved individual questioning. Today, the potential jurors were questioned in a group.
And that white collar is not some sort of halo that would prevent him from human temptation and human emotions.
Religion and the Catholic Church have been the focus of numerous questions throughout the week. And the majority of people in the original pool of potential jurors are Catholic.
Is there anyone on this jury, Catholic, Protestant, whatever, atheist, agnostic, that would do anything other than judge this case based on the testimony that it comes from the witness stand and the law as the judge gives it to you?
Father Robinson is charged with killing Sister Margaret Ann Paul in 1980. Attorneys on both sides questioned jurors today about their ability to accept information that is more than 2 decades old.
So you're not going to have a problem with people coming in testifying to events that took place 26 years ago. You're not going to automatically discount what they say just because of the passage of time.
Ohio, where a priest stands charged with the murder of a nun. Let's listen in.
And the evidence they expect to be produced in support of these claims and defenses. Again, the opening statements of counsel are not evidence. Each side will address you once during the opening statements, with the prosecution being first. You can continue.
Good morning. May it please the court, counsel, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. At the front of most Catholic churches and chapels is a small room called the sacristy. It's usually off to the side from the main altar. It's a place used by the priest to don his vestments and also a place.
Some structural things have changed over the years.
Everything at one time was connected, but we couldn't go that same route because the bridge was blocked off.
But other areas are still the same.
The size of the sacristy, it was quite small. The actual floor space wasn't that much, and of course she was sprawled out, covering a decent portion of what we saw.
Beth Karras is covering the trial for Court TV and was the only television reporter allowed to observe today's tour. Jurors were shown the chapel and Father Robinson's one-time living quarters as a court employee pointed out areas of interest. Jurors were quiet and showed no outward emotion.
I didn't see any real reaction from the jurors except that they're paying close attention and observing as they're told. Jurors could not talk to each other, the lawyers could not talk to the jurors.
In the legal world, such tours are known as a jury view.
The purpose of it is so they can understand when the testimony comes in where things were found. They'll be able to visualize the scene.
I walked over and observed her, and I had to even bend over to see who it was. I was in there for a matter of seconds, and I ran out and screamed.
Sister Madeline Marie Gordon discovered the body of Sister Margaret Ann Paul in April 1980.
And why is it that even after the passage of all this time, you can remember certain events of that day?
Because it was very traumatic to me.
The prosecution used a mannequin and graphic photos to help illustrate the crime scene at the Mercy Hospital Chapel.
Her clothing was up around her waist, and she was bare down to her ankles.
Retired Toledo Police Detective Lieutenant William Keena took the stand late this afternoon and talked about discovering the murder weapon.
Detective Marks opened the large center drawer of the desk, pulled it out, and reached inside, and he says, "Oh, what do we got here?"
Was there anything that he said on either of those two dates that made you think he should not be considered a suspect in this murder?
No.
No further questions.
The defense grilled Detective Keena about the police work on the case.
You don't know who that they is, do you? Do you?
Who?
They. You said she was upset that they had shortened the Friday services. You don't know who that person is, do you?
I've got a good idea who they are.
Do you know specifically who that person is? Did
No.
she ever tell you who that person was?
No.
Never.
Sister Phyllis Ann Gerald was in charge of Mercy Hospital at the time of the murder.
Did you see the defendant, Gerald Robinson, in the sacristy at any time that day? Do you have a recollection of that?
No, I realized he was missing, so I called him. Either I believe I called him that day.
Sister Gerald also testified that the body was found in what she called an unnatural or ritualistic position.
It was so neat and so different, and I told him it was ritualistic.
Pat and Chet Narowski are longtime members of Christ the King Church.
These things have been reported to.
For Catholics, this high-profile trial is on the minds of many.
No, there's a lot of people I know that they're watching it.
The Narowskis say ever since the Father Robinson trial started, they've been glued to their TV.
You heard the first one, the prosecutor, and then you heard the defense lawyer, and you said, well, geez, I wonder why the prosecutor said what he said.
I'm just interested because I'm a Catholic.
I'm watching it, and I hope it's a fair trial.
Marge Bunkowski says she refuses to watch. She's afraid tuning in will taint her image of a man she holds to the highest.
I think he has a very priestly, wholesome look, and I hope that, for God's sake, that he's innocent, because he seems so pure.
And some say they're simply not interested.
There's other things more important than that.
If there's one thing this Catholic community agrees on, it's putting this behind them.
It's important that this is resolved because I think it's a stain on our Catholic community.
I've seen many different stab defects in clothing, and I've never seen one like this.
Detective Terry Cousineau is part of the Toledo Police Department's Scientific Investigations Unit. He testified about blood transfer patterns.
Could you describe what a transfer pattern is?
Transfer pattern is a blood stain pattern that occurs when a bloody object comes in contact with a clean object and leaves blood on the clean object, sometimes showing some of the shape and form of the object that transferred the blood.
The prosecution contends the murder weapon came in contact with an altar cloth that was placed over the sister's body before she was stabbed.
This was a definite transfer pattern that had a ribbed design to it. And looking at the letter opener, I noticed that the handle is ribbed and that this transfer pattern has a consistent shape and size with the ribbed handle of the letter opener.
The letter opener and whether or not it was the murder weapon was the focus of testimony today. Deputy Coroner Dr. Diane Scala Barnett talked about the re-examination of Sister Paul's body when it was exhumed.
We took the letter opener and inserted it into the defect.
And what did you observe when you did that?
It was a perfect fit.
The defense grilled retired Toledo Police Lieutenant William Keena about the lack of reports from the interrogation of Father Robinson in 1980.
Well, some of the stuff is here and some of the stuff isn't here, correct?
Some of the reports are missing, yes.
So, from the police investigation, report-wise, we're not going to ever get the total picture in terms of reports, are we? Are we?
Probably not.
Thank you.
Late this afternoon, forensic anthropologist Julie Saul took the stand. She worked on the case after the body was exhumed.
Since the tip of this letter opener was so consistent with the defects that we had and the fit was so snug and so good that the letter opener could not be eliminated as the cause of those defects.
Nationally recognized blood stain pattern analysis expert Paulette Sutton took the stand today. The focus of questioning was blood transfer patterns and how they relate to this letter opener, which is the alleged murder weapon, and a blood-stained altar cloth found at the scene.
We take a cloth or a rag or whatever we've got, and we hold it in one hand, and we lay the object into that cloth and draw it through. If you open that cloth up later, what you will see is a mirror image because of what happened when I laid that object down and folded the other side against it.
Sutton tested several items in 2004, including the letter opener and the blood-stained altar cloth. She was asked to explain how she came to the conclusion that the letter opener cannot be ruled out as the object that left blood transfer patterns on the cloth.
And if I looked just at that area, it was around in here, that this part could have been folded back over, and then when it's opened up, it's going to create a longer stain than the actual object. So once again, I can't eliminate the handle as being what caused that pattern.
Under cross-examination, the defense asked if something other than the letter opener could have left marks on the altar cloth. The defense has brought up scissors as the possible murder weapon.
That tracing, does that look like anything you would use around the house?
It could be a pair of scissors, yes.
This is that same tracing that I just did over there on something you said could not be excluded concerning the letter opener, correct?
I said the letter opener could not be excluded from making it, not that it is the absolute only object that did.
The prosecution went back to the question of scissors as a possible murder weapon.
Have you ever seen a pair of scissors with a medallion of the Washington Monument on it?
No, sir, I don't think I have.
Lee Paul and his wife were in court today. Sister Margaret Ann was his aunt.
I'm not a lawyer or anything, and I guess I've watched enough TV shows to know that it's all up to the jury, how they interpret everything. I thought it went pretty well for the prosecution. The expert witnesses they have brought in, I think have done a good job so far. It's hard for the family.
Lee Paul is the nephew of Sister Margaret Ann Paul, the nun found stabbed to death Easter weekend, 1980. 26 years ago, Lee was a pallbearer at his aunt's funeral. Back then, Lee says he, along with police, had suspicions about Father Gerald Robinson. Today, Lee Paul told 13 ABC his feelings now are even stronger.
Do you feel in your heart that the police have the right man?
Yes, I do. I really do.
It could be blood.
It could be.
It could be a lot of things, correct?
That is very correct.
Day 3 in court, a former forensic scientist testified Father Robinson's DNA did not show up on several pieces of evidence, including the large altar cloth which covered Paul's body and her underwear.
He could not have left the DNA.
The testing was done 2 years ago since DNA technology was not available in 1980. Prosecutors are also using the modern science of blood transfer patterns. One expert showed how stains resemble the alleged murder weapon, a letter opener found in Father Robinson's room. The stains, she said, also show the outline of a medallion found on the side of that letter opener. Defense attorneys questioned whether or not you could find other images as well.
Does that look like anything you would use around the house?
It could be a pair of scissors, yes.
Dr. Henry Lee took the stand this afternoon. He's a forensic scientist who gained national attention during the O.J. Simpson trial. He testified today about his work on this murder case, and specifically his study of a medallion that was part of the alleged murder weapon.
I cannot come here to tell you this pattern is produced exactly by this. I only can say similar to.
The defense fired back with questions about Dr. Lee's report on this case and the emotion that may or may not have been involved in the murder.
These wounds are more commonly associated with a frenzied type of killing.
Yes.
Okay. Frenzy, would you agree, means something done with some real emotional intensity?
Not necessarily. It's kind of included that.
Earlier in the day, a retired Toledo police detective who was one of the first on the scene of the murder testified. He talked about documenting the scene with pictures and looking for fingerprints. There were no prints found on the alleged murder weapon, but the prosecution was trying to prove that is not unusual.
Let's take a dinner plate. Is that a clean, smooth, dry surface?
Yes, it is.
And if someone were to wash that with detergent and wipe it with a dish towel, would that remove the fingerprint?
Absolutely.
DNA evidence was also part of today's testimony. The questions focused on the alleged murder weapon, the letter opener, a medallion from the letter opener, and a blood-stained altar cloth from the murder scene.
No DNA on the medallion, no DNA on the letter opener, right?
I tested the medallion, the swabs from the medallion. There was no DNA detected. That is correct.
Correct.
On the locations where I can make a comparison, no DNA type foreign to Margaret Paul was detected on the altar cloth.
Another witness testified about the lack of DNA evidence in this case and a possible reason for that.
So there was no DNA there?
No. Or it was below levels of detection.
Also on the stand today was a retired Mercy Hospital third shift supervisor who testified that she went to the chapel every day to pray, but she was unable to the morning of the murder because the chapel door was locked.
A bloody object contact this surface with emotion.
Dr. Henry Lee is a forensic scientist known for his expertise and his work on another high-profile murder case. Lee took the stand during the O.J. Simpson criminal trial 11 years ago. Today, Lee testified in the trial of Father Robinson and said he could not rule out the letter opener as the murder weapon.
All I can conclude is similar to. It could be.
Could you exclude it?
I cannot exclude it.
That letter opener was found in Father Robinson's room at Mercy Hospital, not far from where the body of Sister Margaret Ann Paul was discovered. She was stabbed 31 times during Easter weekend, 1980. One coworker remembers hearing the news.
He said there was a murder in the hospital, in the chapel, and I was totally shocked.
26 years later, new scientific evidence plays into the cold case. But so far, Father Robinson's DNA has not been positively identified by experts in the courtroom.
I did not obtain a DNA profile.
We were unable to get DNA to generate a profile.
13 ABC's legal expert said today's testimony, including Lee's, fell short.
Do you think that he added what he needed to add to this case, or if he was the home run, the big star witness that they were expecting?
Well, he's certainly a star, but I don't think he hit a home run. I don't even think he hit a single. He came in, and his bottom line was the patterns on that altar cloth are similar to the letter opener. That's not good enough.
Several witnesses did not want their voices or their faces recorded during testimony today. Shirley Ann Lucas didn't want her face shown while she was on the stand. She was a housekeeper for the Sisters Convent at Mercy Hospital. Sister Margaret Ann Paul was her superior. She saw Sister Paul for the last time the day before the murder. Lucas became emotional today as she recalled their last visit.
She took my hand and wished myself and my
two daughters, Easter blessings and peace, and kind of squeezed my hand and said, why do they cheat God out of what belongs to him? And then she squeezed my hand and turned around and walked away.
We were unable to record the face or voice of Valerie Burning. She was a housekeeper at Mercy who testified today. She cleaned the crime scene and found blood in the sacristy sink, indicating that someone may have washed their hands. She claims she never brought it up to police in 1980 because she was told to keep quiet by another hospital worker. She also testified that she cleaned Father Robinson's living quarters several times and remembers seeing the alleged murder weapon, this letter opener, and having bad feelings about it. Several other people who worked at Mercy at the time of the murder were also on the stand today. Robert Wodarski was a security guard who passed by the chapel just before the murder. He remembers the doors being open and the lights on right before the prosecution claims the murder happened.
Tell us about who had access to those master keys.
Well, it had been security. The sisters had them. Maintenance had them.
The defense questions the fact that so many people had access to keys.
So it wasn't a real controlled type situation in terms of the keys.
That you'd have to talk to maintenance about it. Because we don't know. Because it didn't come through us.
Kendall Steinbach is a professor at the University of Toledo's College of Law. He teaches criminal procedure investigations, which includes interrogation. We watch part of the tape with him today.
There's something about his demeanor that is just not right when you get into, when it's clear that you are the suspect in this homicide. Let's see a little passion. Let's see a little, hey, you got the wrong guy here, or why are you doing this to me?
Father Robinson is asked why a fellow chaplain pointed the finger at him the day of the murder.
He turns around and he confronts you and says, you did this. What is that all about?
He didn't say you did this.
How did he say that?
I think he said, why?
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 That's all he said was why?
He's also grilled about the alleged murder weapon, a letter opener found in his living quarters.
You had to have that knife down there. And you had to have killed Sister with this knife. Father, why do you smirk at me? I mean, this is serious.
I'm not smirking at you. I don't know how all this is about. Because I was not there.
Detective Ross leaves the room a short time later. Father Robinson sits quietly for most of the time, but he does speak briefly. What he says is hard to hear, but we picked up the words sister and oh my Jesus. Steinbach believes the tape was more helpful to the prosecution than the defense, but he says there is a benefit for the defense.
From the defense point of view, they have gotten the jury to hear him and hear his denials without putting him on the stand at trial and having him subject to cross-examination.
The last of the prosecution's witnesses are expected to take the stand this week.
I think we're in the downhill slope of the prosecution's case. That doesn't mean it's a weak case. It's just that I think the strongest points have probably come out at this point.
Steinbach thinks the prosecution got off to a slow start, but he believes they've done a good job of building the case against Father Robinson. So is a conviction likely?
I think it'll be tough to get a conviction. I would say there's less than a 50% chance of getting a conviction. They might wind up with a hung jury. But I think in terms of getting all 12 jurors to find beyond a reasonable doubt that he's guilty, it's still a hard road to hoe, despite what the prosecution has managed to accomplish.
Many have argued the main reason the prosecution will have a tough time getting a conviction is because the case is based on circumstantial evidence. But Court TV reporter Beth Karras says don't rush to judgment.
Circumstantial evidence cases can be extremely powerful. People say it's only circumstantial. What does that mean? They're more powerful sometimes than direct evidence and eyewitness testimony because eyewitnesses can be wrong.
And Karras says don't expect fireworks when the defense calls its witnesses to the stand.
As we move into the defense evidence, I want to caution people not to have high expectations of a big blockbuster defense case, because that's not what it's all about for defense attorneys. They do not have a burden to put anything on, and if they do, it's just to close up a few things and make a few points, because they're already putting their case on through cross-examination.
Kara says a hung jury is a good possibility in this case, but
after 20 years of trying cases and reporting on cases, I am done predicting, because quite frankly, I can see any result.
The prosecution spent most of the day questioning witnesses who claim to have seen Father Robinson near the murder scene the morning Sister Margaret Ann Paul was found dead. Dr. Jack Barron was the chief resident at Mercy Hospital at the time of the murder. He claims that as he was rushing to the crime scene, he saw a priest in the hallway.
Didn't know by face, but certainly in priest attire going in the other direction. And as I overshot him and realized I'd gone too far, turned around, and just as suddenly as he had sort of appeared, he disappeared. I assumed he had gone down the corridor.
Two other former workers testified today about seeing the father near the chapel that morning, but they did not want their faces or voices recorded. Leslie Kerner claims to have seen Robinson near the chapel doors as she came into work that morning between 6:50 and 7 a.m. Grace Jones says she saw him coming out of the chapel that morning as she was waiting for an elevator. Ulysses Howard is a friend of Jones's and a former Toledo police officer who says she told him about seeing the father that day.
And what did she tell you?
That she observed the priest coming from the area of the chapel. I think she was waiting for the elevator, and at that time I think she said he was carrying a small bag of some sort.
Howard did not work on the Paul murder case, but the defense asked him if he told any other officers about his conversation with Jones.
Between 1980 and 2005, and you had never talked to any police officer about this alleged conversation, had you?
No.
James Wiegand took the stand this afternoon. He is a former Toledo police officer who questioned Father Robinson days after the murder.
I asked if he had any idea as to why this may have occurred. He indicated that he really did not know, but that Sister Paul had a dominant personality.
And he said, did he say that word to you, dominant personality, or those words?
Yes, sir.
During 7 days of testimony, the prosecution called 31 witnesses to the stand. The defense begins presenting its case tomorrow morning.
31 witnesses, numerous pieces of evidence, including the alleged murder weapon, and a taped interrogation of Father Gerald Robinson.
Did you ever have a disagreement with Sister Paul? No, I did not.
They were all part of the prosecution's case against the priest. He's accused of murdering Sister Margaret Ann Paul in 1980. Police arrested Robinson 24 years later in 2004. That's when this tape was made.
You had to have that knife down there, and you had to have killed Sister with this knife. Father, why do you smirk at me? I mean, this is serious. I'm not smirking.
The tape first appeared before a jury on Monday. It was back in court today, along with the man who conducted the interrogation. Detective Tom Ross said the priest had inconsistencies between this interview and another. For example, Ross claims Robinson said he kept his door at the hospital locked, then later changed his answer. Ross also said Robinson admitted to running after hearing of Sister Margaret Ann Paul's murder.
Did you hear what he said in terms of what he did after he finished up?
Yes, he ran.
But the detective says that story changed too. Today's other witnesses placed Father Robinson at or near the crime scene the morning of the murder.
That she observed the priest coming from the area of the chapel.
Turned around, and just as suddenly as he had sort of appeared, he disappeared.
Tomorrow morning, the opposing side will begin defending Father Gerald Robinson.
You know, Judge, we just got done with that, and that's somewhat totally improper. It's the same issue.
Yeah, the objection is sustained.
Thank you.
There were several heated exchanges in the courtroom today as the defense called current and former Toledo police officers who have worked the case.
There's no report that indicates from 1980 that Dr. Barron said anything about Father Robinson. Would that be fair to say?
That's correct.
All right, thank you.
The prosecution maintains this letter opener found in Father Robinson's room is the murder weapon. Defense attorney Alan Connup worked to poke holes in that theory.
She reported to me that a pair of scissors was missing from the chapel.
The scissors had been used to cut the wicks on candles. I asked her if she could describe the scissors, at which time she said, I can get you another pair that are very similar, not exact, but similar, which she did.
The prosecution asked Weinbrecht how investigators began focusing on Father Robinson as a suspect.
Was there one person with a religious background whose whereabouts could not be verified?
Yes.
Who was that, sir?
Father Robinson.
Cold Case Unit Detective Sergeant Steve Forrester was first called by the prosecution. He was back on the stand today for the defense. The focus of the questioning was witness testimony from yesterday that placed Father Robinson near the crime scene the morning of the murder. The defense is trying to prove witnesses' testimony is inconsistent.
Just that it was after 7 o'clock because the person that worked with her midnights left at 7,
right.
And it was before the murder because obviously she didn't see all the discovery of the body because she didn't see all the emergency personnel. She was confused on if it was actually the actual time on the clock.
During cross-examination, the prosecution went back to the issues of police reports and witness interviews.
When you interview people, do you take a court stenographer with you?
No.
So short of that, you really can't take down every word that a person says, correct?
That's usually true, yes.
A retired detective who worked the case in 1980 was also grilled today about police work. Yesterday, a former Mercy Hospital doctor testified that as he was rushing to try to help the victim, he saw a priest going away from the chapel.
In the report back in 1980, was there any mention of a priest or Father Robinson who was observed by Dr. Barron?
Not in this report.
Is there a report where there was a mention?
Not my reports.
The doctor contends investigators focused on his work inside the chapel in 1980, not the priest he claims to have seen in the hallway.
So you took notes?
Correct.
Later transcribed them and made a summary?
That's correct.
In Dr. David Harris's mind, keeping Father Robinson off the stand is a no-brainer.
He's in about in as good a position on this question as he could be. So I would never put him on the stand.
The defense has been able to poke holes in the prosecution's case. Attorneys questioned current and former police officers about the 3 witnesses who said they saw Father Robinson near the chapel at the time Sister Paul was murdered.
Now, there's a certain consistency that I want to call your attention to in all the doctor's reports. Number one, there was not a single doctor, including Dr. Barron at the time, 1980, that indicated that they saw Father Robinson or any priest. Is that correct?
Did you say in the reports?
Yeah.
That's correct.
Harris says because the defense has been able to attack what amounts to circumstantial evidence, he thinks it's too risky for Father Robinson to take the stand.
On cross-examination, any defendant, guilty, innocent, whatever, can be made to look like a liar, can be made to look like he can't explain himself, can be made to look inconsistent.
Harris says the inconsistencies could arise because the jury has already heard Father Robinson's story when prosecutors played a taped police interrogation.
If I'm his lawyer, I stand up and say, he's already told his story.
And the jury will have to decide what story to believe. In West Toledo, Zach Ottenstein, 13 ABC, Action News.
Retired Deputy Chief Ray Vetter was involved with the Sister Margaret Ann Paul murder investigation in 1980. But today on the witness stand he testified that he did not recall many of the particulars of the case. A retired detective on the case, however, testified that Vetter interrupted a police interrogation of Father Robinson in 1980 so that a high-ranking leader of the Catholic diocese could talk to the father.
If Detective Marks and Lieutenant Keena said that they were in the middle of interrogating Father Robinson and that there was a knock at the door and that you were there with Monsignor Schmidt. Monsignor Schmidt came in. There was a brief conversation between Monsignor and the defendant, and the two of them left. Is that not the way you remember it?
I don't remember entering the room at all.
Not that you went in.
I don't remember interrupting a conversation.
Vetter testified today that he was a close personal friend of Monsignor Schmidt. But the defense asked if that affected his work on this case.
Did you do anything to try to protect Father Robinson?
No.
Dr. Kathleen Reichs took the stand today to testify about the forensic testing done on Sister Paul's jaw after her body was exhumed in 2004. Reichs is an internationally known forensic expert who has a network TV show based on her work. Reichs testified today that she had concerns about the way the alleged murder weapon was tested with the defect in Sister Paul's jaw.
This is before Dr. Sims did his analysis, and this is after he did his analysis. And the point is, there's a change. There's a difference. The edges are very fragile on this lesion, and those edges have changed, just as a result of the very delicate and I'm sure careful manipulation that Dr. Sims did.
The prosecution asked how Reichs came to that conclusion, since she did not talk to the forensic experts who did the work or test the evidence herself.
Did you ever talk to Julie or Frank Saul to talk to them about how they actually did this test fit?
No.
What precautions they took to make sure that it was in no way damaged or altered the actual defect?
No.
Okay. And you never talked to Steve Sims about that either?
No.
And you never examined the bone yourself?
No.
Several DNA and trace evidence experts were also on the stand today.
After I performed my comparisons, I was unable to come to a conclusive result. I did not feel comfortable either including or excluding the patterns as having come from the letter opener.
Okay. And you're not certified as a forensic expert in bloodstain pattern interpretation?
I do not have any certification, no sir.
I think my belief in his guilt is a little bit stronger than when we went into it.
Dr. Kendall Steinbach is a professor at the University of Toledo's College of Law. He weighed in today on the job the prosecutors and the defense attorneys have done.
There were some things that were helpful to the defense that came out in the course of the prosecution's presentation. I mean, the fact that there was some foreign material on her fingernails and on the waistband of her underwear that indicated some male DNA that wasn't Father Robinson's. Interestingly, what we got was more traditional kinds of criminal trial evidence, making up, I think, the heart of the prosecution's case here.
The case will likely be in the hands of the jury sometime tomorrow.
They will be told to go in and not necessarily take a vote initially, but to discuss with an open mind with their fellow jurors, go through the evidence, and just see where people stand and how they characterize the evidence. And then at some point, of course, they have to take at least some kind of preliminary vote, and if it's not unanimous one way or another, there'll be further discussion.
Steinbach says there are things to watch for as the deliberations move forward.
One thing to keep an eye on during the jury deliberations is the jury's request for testimony to be read back, which will happen in open court if that is decided on, or additional instructions from the judge. Sometimes they're not clear on the original instructions, and the judge can try to help clarify them or even reread them again. That sometimes will give you some indication of which way the jury is tending.
The length of deliberations can also be an indicator of the verdict.
The longer, I would say, it goes on, the more favorable it is for the prosecution. The shorter it is, the more favorable typically for the defense. But we could go on for a while and get a hung jury.
This is not a case that can be tried without talking about God and religion. I mean, after all, we have a Roman Catholic priest as a defendant, a Roman Catholic nun as a victim. So whether you believe in God or providence or destiny or fate, it may be that this is a case that had to wait 26 years before it could be fairly tried.
They must be pretty darn desperate to have to blame it on the church. Maybe they should blame it on their own poor investigation.
Both sides spent hours today delivering their final arguments to the men and women who will decide if Father Gerald Robinson is guilty as charged.
The state of Ohio is not asking you to convict a 68-year-old man, as they keep referring to him in court here today. We're asking you to convict a 42-year-old man 26 years late.
Was this really an open-minded pursuit for justice? No. Not even close. Or was it only about convicting him.
The prosecution worked to establish that testimony proved that this letter opener found in Father Robinson's living quarters is the murder weapon.
Take all the time you want in that jury room and study these. Because these two photographs, perhaps more than any other item of evidence, proves that that was the murder weapon.
But the defense worked to create a reasonable doubt about the murder weapon. Defense attorney John Thebes focused on a pair of scissors.
Where's the loop on that picture? It's a straight, triangular blade, like a scissors. Like a scissors. And it's no coincidence. There's no coincidence at all that Sister worked with the pair of scissors and they were never found, were they?
The prosecution worked to convince the jury that all the pieces of circumstantial evidence in this case came together to provide a clear picture of the murder.
Is it just a coincidence that this stain on the altar cloth matches the handle of his letter opener? Is it just a coincidence that there's this transfer pattern of this ribbing? Look at it, next to the handle of State's Exhibit 1.
The defense took several shots at the investigative work on this case.
Did anybody ever go down that hallway and look for blood? They could do it. Did they look for hair? They could do it. Did they look for anything, material? Did they go into Father's room if they thought that was important?
The closing arguments ended with final pleas. One for justice in the murder of Sister Margaret Ann Paul, the other for the man accused of her murder.
So proud to stand up for Father Robinson. Now it's your turn to stand up for Father Robinson.
He has always known that one day he was going to have to be held accountable for what he has done. So for all these years, he has been waiting. And now is waiting for you.
I am joined by Professor Daniel Steinbach right now of the University of Toledo. He's a professor at the College of Law. And is this a surprise? It may have been quicker than some anticipated, but a lot of people yesterday thought that this would be in by the end of the week.
Yes, that's so, but they've only been deliberating for 6 hours. I think it's something of a surprise that it's come this quickly. There was a lot of evidence, a lot of testimony, and some complicated forensic evidence. So I think it's a little bit of a surprise that we have a verdict so soon.
Sister Margaret Ann Paul, back in 1980, was choked so hard that 2 bones in her neck were broken and the blood vessels in her eyes burst.
She was also stabbed numerous times, as you've heard throughout the trial, including 9 times, which in the shape of an upside-down cross. That brought in a lot of questions about ritualistic-type killings. Prosecutors claim the killer tried to make it also look like a sexual crime as well. So all those things kind of coming into play in that courtroom.
I am here with Stephen Collier. He's been a trial lawyer for more than 2 decades. Of course, you and probably every other attorney in this town and many others have watched the case closely. Your thoughts as we are maybe just minutes away from a verdict?
Well, my thoughts are like everybody else's. This has been a long trial. There's been a lot of evidence put on. The prosecution certainly put their best foot forward. They did what they could in the case, but certainly with a rather quick deliberation like this, I would think that the defense would be somewhat optimistic at this point.
With the jury, will the defendant rise? Find the defendant guilty of murder. I'm going to poll the jury now. Ms. Como, is this your signature and does this reflect your verdict?
If you just tuned in, we are providing special coverage. Take a look. It says it right there. The jury has come back and found Father Gerald Robinson guilty of the murder of Sister Margaret Ann Paul 25 years ago.
What do you think now here in the verdict?
I don't know that the rebuttal was all that important. I think with a fairly quick verdict like this, they must have been convinced with the entire case, the presentation of the case. You really have to give the prosecution credit to bring a case that's over 20 years old, with the limitations that they had, with the argument that the defense could make of poor memories, not great documentation. But what they did is, as I was saying earlier, they did keep the case simple. They did have somewhat complicated, perhaps expert testimony, but the essential case, it was simple. they tried to show that all the evidence pointed towards Father Robinson and nobody else.
We're going to go now to Susan Ross Wells. She is live in the Alert Center in the Action Center with some reaction. How's the diocese reacting, Susan?
Well, we do have a statement that we've received from the bishop, Bishop Leonard Blair of the Diocese of Toledo, and I'm going to read this for you. He says, "This is a sad day for the Diocese of Toledo. In the matter of the state of Ohio versus Gerald Robinson, a jury of his peers has convicted him of the 1980 murder of Sister Margaret Ann Paul."
It's my understanding the jury has reached a verdict in this case. Is that correct? All right.
A murder case that took 26 years to go to trial and several weeks to prosecute came down to a matter of seconds in the end.
Thank you. Would the jury, will the defendant rise, find the defendant guilty of murder?
Father Gerald Robinson showed no emotion as he was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs 26 years after the murder of Sister Margaret Ann Paul.
We always believed in the arguments that we were making. We always believed that we were prosecuting the right individual. We always believed that that letter opener was clearly the murder weapon. We always believed that he lied to the police about his whereabouts.
Lucas County Prosecutor Julia Bates says this case is a good example of her office's commitment to finding justice, no matter how much time has passed.
The message is that we really do care, that these cases are not sitting on a shelf somewhere gathering dust, that these men and women, you know, not only from my office, but from the department, from the coroner's office, you know, and so forth, really do care about that and want to find answers for those people.
Prosecutor Dean Mandros says it took courage for Bates to even pursue this case.
The Catholic Church as an institution is something that you're not anxious to necessarily be on the other side of. We don't feel that we were on the other side of them, but any case of this age presents a tremendous amount of obstacles.
Tom Ross is one of the investigators who questioned Father Robinson. A videotape of his interrogation was played for the jury. Some say that tape was a crucial piece of evidence for the prosecution. Ross hopes people remember, however, that this is a case about one priest, not an entire religion.
Like all homicides, you're glad for a successful conclusion, especially in this case. I hope this doesn't shake the faith of millions of followers out there in the Catholic Church. I hope they stay behind their church. This is just one bad person who was within the church.
Prosecutors left the courtroom to a round of cheers, but this was obviously a tough day for the defense team.
It was. I love Father, and but you know, this is the process in the country in which we live and how it works, and you know, we did everything we could.
So what does the defense do from here? An appeal is next on the list.
The first thing we have to do is look carefully at the trial, at the transcripts, and figure out what issues are appealable, and that's the next process.
Faith is an important part of Gloria Pompelli's life, and that faith was not shaken when her former priest, Father Gerald Robinson, was convicted of murder.
Only he knows and God knows.
But Gloria says the man she knows is compassionate, not a killer. Gloria first came to know Father Robinson when he conducted Mass at Toledo's Westmore Senior Center. She and her husband Mike would attend.
He was just the kindest, gentlest, most humble man that I have ever met. I mean that sincerely.
When Mike was battling cancer at Flower Hospital, Father Robinson was the chaplain who often came to visit. Gloria says he helped her through the toughest moments.
I remember him saying, "Gloria, you remember one thing. God loves you very much."
Gloria can recall some lighthearted moments too. Mike had a laryngectomy and used a voice box to communicate. Once he told his wife he had confessed his sins to Father Robinson.
And he said, "That's between me and my priest." And Father Robinson said, "And the whole west wing of the hospital," because when Mike talked, you could just, hear him all over.
Gloria watched most of the trial on TV. She prays for Father Robinson every day.
Can you imagine this little man in prison with terrible, terrible people? He's the epitome what a priest should be, you know. Bing Crosby, Father O'Malley.
Did he kill the nun? It's just what the jury said.
Some Catholics say they'll defend Father Robinson till the day they die.
I don't know how anybody could say Mass for 25 years and hold a secret inside of them. I don't believe it.
Down deep inside, I don't really know if he's guilty or not guilty. I wouldn't want to be on the jury myself.
Some say it's up to the Lord to decide.
I don't feel it's up to me to judge whether he's guilty or not.
I pray that he didn't do it. Only he knows and God knows, and God's going to be the one that takes care of it in the end.
Today, Toledo Bishop Leonard Blair sent a letter to parishioners pledging full cooperation with local prosecutors in any church-related investigation.
On everything, yes, I do believe that.
The letter says Father Robinson is a retired priest and will remain suspended from all public ministry. It also says church law does not call for any further penalty. But should the church take a harder stance against the convicted priest?
I don't know. I don't know what to tell you.
But some say being convicted and going to jail is enough of a penalty.
What kind of penalty would you want them to?
I mean, this is a priest convicted of murder.
Well, he's suspended from saying Mass and everything else. What more?
Professionally, I find myself having been changed by this. Personally, my priorities, I think, are always in order. I have my faith, my family.
John Thebes accepts the jury's verdict in the Father Robinson case, but he disagrees with it. Only 13 ABC was there when Robinson left the Lucas County Jail on this bus early today, headed for a state prison receiving center in Orient, Ohio. This was a tough day for Thebes and other members of the defense team who spent years working on the case.
I have a very strong wife at home, and she helped me get through it. You really have to look forward in a case like this. Look for what's the next step, how can you help take that next step, and that's really what the focus is at the present time. And leave your own feelings aside, deal with them on your own privately, but what can you do now to help the case move along?
Robinson spent the last week in the Lucas County Jail. We're told he saw friends, family, and members of the clergy. Thebes also visited several times.
He's in a state where he's praying a lot, and that's really who he is. That's how he is coping with what he's going through. He's praying. He has a lot of contact not only with friends but family. His family's been up to visit him. He's praying an awful lot.
Robinson will undergo both mental health and medical evaluations here in Orient before being sent to the prison where he will serve his time. That process can take anywhere from days to months. And as Father Robinson moves through the system, Thebes says one thing is weighing heavily on his mind.
A profound sense of concern for his well-being. And that's one thing, unfortunately, that's really out of my control at this point. And I think that's why I have that concern, because it's just out of my control.
Lisa Guyton, 13 ABC, Action News.
This civil suit against Father Gerald Robinson was filed back in April of 2005. More than a year later, we're only inching closer to a trial date. The defense seat is empty, the plaintiff's seat is empty, and so is the bench. The day's activity is inside Judge Ruth Ann Frank's chambers.
There's a trial date set in May of next year.
The judge has scheduled Father Gerald Robinson to take his seat in the defense chair and stand trial May 21st, 2007 in this lawsuit, where an unidentified woman alleges the retired priest made her the victim of clerical ritual and sexual abuse as a minor when he worked at St. Adelbert School. It goes on to say the victim was kidnapped and held against her will in the basement, while Father Robinson and other clergy dressed as nuns cut her with a knife as a sacrifice to Satan, made her drink animal blood as well. This civil suit is filled with many graphic and disturbing allegations against Father Gerald Robinson, but it's difficult for his attorneys to focus on this when there are so many big money issues left unsettled in the criminal case.
There's bills for DNA, there's bills for anthropologists, there are other outstanding bills.
Defense attorney John Thebes leaves the civil court judge's chambers worried about bills the fund trustee hasn't paid in the criminal case.
The funds are not the lawyers, they are not the trustees, they are Father Robinson's defense fund. And I would hope by noon tomorrow those funds are released or checks are cut to pay the people that have done work,
on DNA, on anthropology. I would hope by noon tomorrow that is done.
Or else, Thebe says, some next steps will be taken. In downtown Toledo, Ephraim Graham, 13 ABC, Action News.
The former Toledo priest convicted of killing a nun was moved to a different hospital today. Father Gerald Robinson is serving at least 15 years for the 1980 murder of Sister Margaret Ann Paul. Prison officials say today that Robinson was moved to the Corrections Medical Center in Columbus for a kidney problem. He was taken to the Ohio State University Medical Center on December 7th. Officials say this problem is not life-threatening.